is the explosive development of the human intellect. And yes, our brain is much bigger. It's the same anatomy. I think that this explosive development has come because we, and as far as we know, only we, have developed the way of communication that I'm using now. I'm talking to you in words. If there was time, I could paint pictures. I could take you to places in your mind where you haven't been before. We can teach about things that aren't there. We can learn about the distant past and take lessons from it. We can make plans for the distant future. I could plan to come back here in 4 years and meet all of you again. That's a quite, reasonable plan to make. And above all, we can discuss, as we are about to do here. And I think that it's this power, this ability, that's caused our brain to develop so explosively, so that it's so much bigger and can do so many more things. Even though chimpanzees are way smarter than we used to think. It doesn't make sense to compare even the brightest chimpanzee who can do things on a computer with a touchpad involving memorizing numbers and their places faster than any high school student in Japan, as one example, certainly faster than me, but it doesn't make sense to compare even that chimpanzee with the average human being. So, if we are, and I'm sure we would all agree that we are, the most intellectual being that's ever walked this planet, how come we're destroying that planet? It is our only home. It's been estimated by those who are good at creating mathematical models that if every human being on the planet today, and that's not counting the projected increase in population numbers, but if every human being living on the planet today had the standard of living of us in this room, we would need at least 5 new planets to provide sufficient non-renewable natural resources. Well, we don't even have 1 new planet. We landed with this one. Maybe one day we'll colonize Mars, but I doubt if anybody in this room would be alive if that happened, and I'm not sure it's a very appealing prospect. I don't much like the look of Mars. It doesn't have all the things I love best, like forests and the trees that you have here, and the rich biodiversity, which we are rapidly losing on our planet. But Mars has nothing. And so we have to get together and do something to get out of the mess we've made. We've got to forget this beautiful dream of unlimited economic development on a planet that has finite natural resources, because it won't happen. And the time will come when the planet sort of gives up. It won't die, but human beings might. That's the problem. So, not surprising, as I'm going around the world talking about these things that I've mentioned and all those others that I haven't, like the terrible things that are happening in the ocean and so forth, and the terrible cruelty to animals and to each other. I find so many young people who seem to have lost hope. Some of them, most of them, just apathetic. I mean, it doesn't really matter what we do. And some of them really depressed. I've met some really depressed young people. And some of them angry, some of them violent. And I began talking to these young people. They were mostly university students, some high school, also people out in their first job, having left the sort of world where they could still be idealists when they were undergoing higher education and suddenly face up to reality. And all these people said, well, you've compromised our future and there's nothing we can do about it. We have compromised their future. Every one of us in this room knows some child, maybe related to us. It may be a son or a daughter. It may be a niece or a nephew. It may just be the children of friends. And when I think, as I see these children all around the world, how we've harmed this planet since I was their age, I feel a deep shame and desperation. And that's what led to our Roots and Shoots program that was mentioned earlier. And this is what I want to concentrate on, because this is what ties in to sustainable living. It's why it's so desperately important that we find new ways of thinking, new ways of living, new ways of conducting our societies, because we do care for our children. We do. And we have to find a way out of the mess that we've made before it's too late. There will be ecological collapses. We do depend on Mother Nature for almost everything that is a blessing in our lives. So the Roots and Shoots program began in Tanzania with 12 high school students. And they were sitting on my veranda complaining the government wasn't doing anything about the problems that they saw around them, social and environmental. They weren't learning about the environment in school. They weren't learning about wildlife, which is their heritage in Tanzania. And they were complaining bitterly. And I said, well, supposing we try to do something. You guys, suppose you try to do something. They were about 17, 18. And this made them sort of look up and, well, yes, why don't we? So they went back, 12 students to 9 different schools. They formed little groups of their friends who felt the same way. We arranged for them to meet from time to time and discuss things, bring people in to speak to them, help to give them a voice and help them to learn more about the problems so that they could then work out what they wanted to do to try and solve those problems. Right from the beginning, it was a program that was going to involve 3 types of project for every group. Every group or club of Roots and Shoots was going to choose a project that would help people, the people around them, or victims of an earthquake or tsunami far away. A project that would help animals, whether it was wildlife or whether it was domestic animals, whether it was stray dogs and cats, or the horrible cruelty of animals in our intensive farms, or learning about wildlife. And the third project to help the environment that we all share. And that could be something simple like recycling and collecting trash, or it could be something really complex like going back week after week, even month after month, even year after year, to remove exotic species from some kind of habitat and restore a wetland, watch a forest come back to life. And so, woven in with these 3 projects, a theme of let's learn to live in harmony, not only with each other, not only between religions and cultures and nations, but also between us and Mother Nature. Let's learn to live in harmony with Mother Nature before it's too late. Roots and Shoots that began with these 12 high school students is now in 127 countries. There's a growing Roots and Shoots movement in Singapore. It's all over Tanzania where it began. It's in every US state. It's all over Canada. There are over 1,000 groups in the UK, my own home country. It's right across mainland China and Taiwan, and it's growing around Australia, New Zealand, and all these other countries are sort of beginning and gradually growing in their own way. It's done so much to change lives. I actually, as I say, started in Tanzania, where a lot of the people are living in rural areas and are very concerned with habitat destruction, dynamite fishing on the reefs and so forth. But then I wanted to see, is this program going to work for other kinds of children who have their own problems? So the next place I tried was South Central, if any of you have heard of that, in Los Angeles, one of the worst districts where there is the worst crime and drive-by shootings and everything. And I was helped to move in there by the Los Angeles police, a friend of mine there. And it worked. We have Roots and Shoots in the inner cities now in the United States, the inner cities of other countries. It would work magic to improve relationships between immigrants and the nationals of a country, because we've seen that happen in big refugee camps. We've seen Roots and Shoots, and we've been told that this program has done more to improve relations between the local Tanzanians and the Congolese refugees than any other program ever. So here we have a program which is enabling young people to find a voice. We're listening to them. It's empowering them, just as we're empowering the women around the Gombe National Park and now other areas. And when I hear, and we have festivals and gatherings of Roots and Shoots. We will have one here this afternoon, as it's the 20th anniversary of Roots and Shoots, I hear these young people talking about sustainable living. I meet so many who have been absolutely divorced from nature in the cities, in the urban areas. Singapore, the children are very lucky because you have the trees everywhere. You have these beautiful trees. But there are so many cities where it's just mostly concrete. And how can children grow up to care if they don't know, if they haven't had the opportunity to understand? We can talk later about sustainable development in an increasingly urbanized world. We all know we have to come to grips with it. I suspect everybody in this room knows about some of the amazing technology that's been developed that will enable us to live more sustainably in the city, using our waste to create energy for our electricity, using cars that are less gas guzzling, all these marvels of new green energy, the solar and so forth. Singapore should have more solar, I think, but that's just what I think, because I have an old-fashioned house in England where I grew up that I now share with my sister, and they told us that solar wouldn't work because the roof is all points and wouldn't have a proper exposure to the sun. But it does work, and we get all our hot water and electricity from those solar panels. And then people say, oh, but there's lots of cloud cover and not enough sun in Singapore. But the solar is working way up in the north, in the Hebrides in Scotland. And it works very reliably. So it's much more sophisticated now, some of this solar energy. And then there's the wind energy. And tides, I don't know if Singapore has tides. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. It's probably being messed up by these rivers that have been prevented from going into the sea. I know that the marine ecosystem will have been compromised because it needs the flush of fresh water to maintain the low level of salinity that some of these creatures need. I think I'm not going to proceed much beyond that, because I think that lays out a scene of what we've done to the world. And we all know that urban areas are increasing. Probably everybody in this room has heard about urban sprawl and how that is one of the greatest damages to biodiversity and wildlife that's trying to live around the cities. And I suspect most people have heard about ideas to develop green corridors so that animals can be linked. I was delighted to hear that there was going to be a bridge over the big main road that separates the monkeys. I've forgotten where it is. I visited a wonderful project of urban farming in an area that used to be farmland, was taken over for development, but there's this big area where the old farmers are coming back, they're getting their hands back in the earth. But for me, how wonderful, because that's where Roots and Shoots children can learn about farming, can learn about where their food comes from. Because a lot of children in cities haven't the faintest idea where their food comes from. And so seeing that project, seeing the old farmers so happy, knowing what it could do for the children of Singapore, and this can be multiplied. And urban farming is something I feel very passionate about. And I learned quite a lot about these things when I wrote that book, Harvest for Hope, about food and how we actually can improve our food supply in the cities. So I think I've said enough to start our panel off. I hope so. Enough to talk about, enough to think about. There's an awful lot I haven't said, but I don't have time to say it. I was told at the beginning, Jane, talk about everything. Well, sorry, but we would be here all day, and we don't have all day. And I'm anxious to hear what other people have to say about these very pressing issues, because what goes on in Singapore is kind of like, could be a blueprint for many other places. And the fact that Singapore is a sort of hub surrounded by Indonesia, by communities suffering like the communities around Gombe, means that, you know, we share the same kind of problems, and maybe we can share some of the same kind of solutions. And as I'm traveling 300 days a year, I can take solutions from Singapore or ask questions about Singapore's problems as I travel around. And that's the way we really do learn in this crazy old world of ours that's still so beautiful. And thank you.